Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Brajajana Randana Yasodanandana Brajajana Randana Yamuna Chihara Vanachari Yamuna Chihara Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Antara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So read from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 5. Narada Muni cursed by Prajapati Daksa. Text 21. Iti vyavasita rajan. Iti vyavasita rajan. Hariyashva ekachetasaha. Hariyashva ekachetasaha. Prayayustam parikramya. Prayayustam parikramya. Pantanam anivartanam. Pantanam anivartanam. Iti vyavasita rajan. Haryashva ekachetasaha. Prayayustam parikramya. Pantanam anivartanam. Iti vyavasita rajan. Haryashva ekachetasaha. Prayayustam parikramya. Pantanam anivartanam. Iti vyavasita rajan. Haryashva ekachetasaha. Haryayustam parikramya. Pantanam anivartanam. iti vyavasita rajan haryashva ekachetasaha pariyustam parikramya Pitanam Anivartanam Iti Vyavasita Rajan Haryashva Ekachetasaha Rayustam Parikramya Pantanam Anivartanam. Mataji's. Iti Vyavasita Rajan Haryashva Ekachetasaha Haryustam Parikramya Pantanam Anivartanam Iti Vyavasita Rajan Haryashva Ekachetasaha Prayayustam Parikramya Pantanam Anivartanam Iti. Thus, Vyavasitaha, being fully convinced by the instructions of Narada Muni, Rajan, O King, Haryashvaha, the sons of Prajapati Daksha, Ekachetasaha, all being of the same opinion, Yayuhu, left, Tam, Narada Muni, Parikramya, circumambulating, Pantanam, on the path, Anavartanam, which does not bring one back again to this material world. Translation. Shukadev Goswami continued, My dear king, after hearing the instructions of Narada, the Haryashvas, the sons of Prajapati Daksha, were firmly convinced. They all believed in his instructions and reached the same conclusion. Having accepted him as their spiritual master, they circumambulated that great sage and followed the path by which one never returns to this world. In response, please. Shukadev Goswami said, Shukadev Goswami continued, My dear king, after hearing the instructions of Narad, the Haryashvas, the sons of Prajapati Daksha, were firmly convinced. They all believed in his instructions and reached the same conclusion. Having accepted him as their spiritual master, they circumambulated that great sage and followed the path by which one never returns to this world. From this verse, we can understand the meaning of initiation and the duties of a disciple and spiritual master. The spiritual master never instructs his disciples, take a mantra from me, pay me some money, and by practicing this yoga system, you will become very expert in materialistic life. This is not the duty of a spiritual master. Rather, the spiritual master teaches the disciple how to give up materialistic life, and the disciple's duty is to assimilate these instructions and ultimately follow the path back home, back to Godhead, from whence no one returns to this material world. After hearing the instructions of Narada Muni, the Haryashvas, the sons of Prajapati Daksha, decided not to be entangled in materialistic life by begetting hundreds of children and having to take care of them. This would have been unnecessarily entangling. The Hariashras did not consider pious and impious activities. Their materialistic father had instructed them to increase the population. But because of the words of Narada Muni, they could not heed that instruction. Narada Muni, as their spiritual master, gave them the Shastric instructions that they should give up this material world, and as bona fide disciples, they followed his instructions. One should not endeavor to wander to different planetary systems within this universe. For even if one goes to the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, one must return again. Shine Punye Martyalokam Vishante. The endeavors of karmas are a useless waste of time. One should endeavor to return home back to Godhead. This is the perfection of life. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 8:16, Abrahma bhuvanal loka punar arvatina arjuna mam upechita konteya punar janmana vidyate. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest are all places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Om Gam Timirandasya Ganjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jaina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastatya Deshatarine. So here in the beginning of this verse or purport, it makes a distinction between a bona fide spiritual master and somebody who's not bona fide. And on Sunday I made that distinction between Shukaracharya. He was actually, Shuka means seminal. So, sometimes in India, many times in India actually, they take initiation from the family guru. But usually, he's not actually, maybe not so qualified, and therefore he's doing that as a job. He gets supported by his disciples. And therefore, when we're actually in a situation where we're not independent, then we can't speak, is it? If we're not independent, we can't speak. If we're actually under the control of some other power, it means that our way of speaking is going to be according to please that person to some degree. Is that right? The general tendency, So, a devotee has to be independently intelligent to some degree. In other words, we study Shastra and we become well versed in Shastra, then we're able to discriminate who is a bona fide spiritual master and who is not bona fide. And this was Bali Maharaj, even though he was a demon, he was actually a devotee at heart, and he understood the essence of Shastra. And that was to, surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So immediately when Shukaracharya gave him some materialistic guidance based on his own preservation, he knew that if Bali Maharaj lost everything, he wouldn't get, his remuneration from his disciple, like that. So Bali Maharaj could see that, and immediately, well, not immediately, he actually thought about it for quite a while. And then with, that discrimination, he decided to disobey the order of his spiritual master. So this is extremely rare. especially in our movement, because everybody is, fixed in devotional service. Maybe sometimes we may be a little, swayed a little bit, but generally. But, when we go outside this movement, it's different. That's the process of actual initiation, is that we don't rely on somebody telling us who we should take initiation from, but we actually learn how to discriminate. When I first joined the movement, it was like that. But, there were zonal acharyas, and that's who we took initiation from. But that system, it didn't work, not necessarily for that reason, but, for so many reasons. And then it became more that, there were more spiritual masters. And the GBC now are actually advocating that there should be more. And this is what Prabhupada said, spiritual master mean one who sets one on the spiritual path, or guides one on the spiritual path. And there's both shiksha and diksha. So shiksha is, which is more important, shiksha or diksha? Shiksha. So we don't need to take diksha. Actually, I was into a class by Shivaram Swami, sorry. And he said, he was thinking it's shiksha. But then when he came to the conclusion of reading and discussing it, he realized it's actually diksha. But, without shiksha, we don't make any progress. But the diksha guru, his duty is to deliver the disciple. He takes that responsibility officially. It's like that. The shiksha guru may give guidance, but he may not be guiding the disciple all the time. He's not particularly in charge of that disciple's deliverance. He's helping. So the diksha guru should be the one who gives guidance. And if he can't give guidance, like the situation in our movement is, many of the spiritual masters, they've got thousands of disciples and they travel. So, you may not see them so often. But he has to set in process a situation where we get educated. That's his so that's why it's actually, he's actually making sure that we get shiksha, in other words. So that's one thing. And the Hariashvas, they weren't in ISKCON. They weren't in a particular, when we come to ISKCON, we tend to be wrapped in cotton wool for a little bit. Have you noticed? I'm a little bit older than most devotees when I joined. Now, I used to actually doing things for myself. You know what I mean? And I found when I joined, it was like, oh, blimey. You know what I mean? Everything was done for you. And it was really difficult for me to actually deal with sometimes. But yeah, I mean, in the standard way is that one has to search for a guru. And to search for a guru, one has got to really study a person. Is that right? Like Gaur Govinda Maharaj. He left this world about 15 years ago or more, maybe longer, 20 years. But, he was actually born in a Vaishnava family. And he was teaching, he was a teacher. And he was practicing spiritual life, throughout his life. But it was actually, I think he was in his 40s or maybe even 50s before he actually got a spiritual master, a bona fide spiritual master. He was discriminating. And eventually he came across Srila Prabhupada in Vrindavan. And, he could understand by the way Prabhupada was speaking that actually this is my spiritual master. So, how fortunate are we to actually get the association of a bona fide spiritual master? In other words, how fortunate are we to come to this movement? It's so fortunate. We're guided every step of the way. So here it's talking about, Haryashvas, they were on the path of sense enjoyment. What's that called? Pravriti marg, path of sense enjoyment. And here we're talking about Nivriti marg, path of no sense enjoyment. Sometimes they call it, what do they call it? Shreyas and prayas. Prayas means, my primary needs, my material needs. I remember there was one devotee asking Gaura Maharaj, and it's, what is Shreyas? And so they explain, he says, what is Shreyas? He said, long-term enjoyment. No! Got a high-pitched voice. And he started talking, what is this person talking about? He says, Shreyas is spiritual life. Because that's the ultimate goal of spiritual life. And that's what this verse is actually explaining. So there's a nice section of the Srimad Bhagavatam from in the second chapter of the first canto. I think it's from verse 6 all the way up to verse 22, I think. And this explains the process of devotional service. And the first thing that's mentioned is, the sages at Naimisharanya, they ask 6 questions. And one of those questions, what is the ultimate occupation for all living entities? What is the ultimate benefit? Shreyas, in other words. And then the answer came in the second chapter. It said that Savai Pumsham Paradharma Yato Bhaktir Adoksaja Ahoitaki Aparihata Yayatna Suprasidati. Pumsham means Sarve Pumsham Paradharma. Paradharma, the highest activity. Yato Bhaktir Hadoksaja. Devotional service unto Adoksaja. And that service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to actually satisfy the self. So, no pravriti, all nivriti. Is that possible? Is it possible? We can try, but it won't work. We are actually accepting the path of pravriti marg, but we can't, just negate everything straight away. We're a person. We are who we are. And it doesn't just go when we when we hear about chanting Hare Krishna. So the facility, so Prabhupada said in Bhagavad Gita, he says that in the beginning of devotional service, it takes expert guidance to traverse this path of devotional service. So, the process is, what do you call that process? Anybody remember? We use everything in Krishna's service. Yukta Vairagya, that's right. So Yukta Vairagya means that also it applies to the individual. What I have, what my nature is, I apply it appropriately. And so that's the need of that's the duty of the spiritual master. It's mentioned in the Nectar of Instruction. He understands the nature of his disciple. And therefore, he's able to give relevant instructions that disciple can, first of all, follow, and what will actually help him to come to the next stage. Is it important to actually give him instructions he can follow? What happens if he keeps giving instructions that he can't? Not going to work, is it? The disciple's going to become completely feeling separated from his spiritual master, disheartened. The spiritual master, if he's not understanding the nature of the disciple, is going to become maybe frustrated. So, I've heard some from spiritual. They don't tell disciples some things because they know they won't be able to follow them. And Prabhupada did that, didn't he? He wouldn't talk to everybody the same. He'd talk to people differently. He just encouraged some devotees because he knew that's all they needed. And so others, he would actually give them really strong guidance. Like, Tamal Krishna Maharaj. you know, he would having all the devotees were complaining to Prabhupada about, he were too heavy with them. And he was feeling like, what's the point, in carrying on with this service? So he said to Prabhupada, what's the point, Prabhupada? I might as well go to China. And Prabhupada's eyes lit up. And he said, yes, you can go to China. And Tamil Krishna Maharaj, although he was like gung-ho, he couldn't swallow that. He said, Prabhupada, we're only joking. And Prabhupada became really angry with him. He said his lips started quivering. And so then, about 15 minutes later, Tamil Krishna, he went away and he came back with his bags packed. And he went, but he couldn't have done that with everybody. So, why am I saying this is because, when we're trying to give people guidance, we should understand this point. And also as a disciple, we have to understand that point as well. That if it's something which is, making me feel really dysfunctional, then I have to be able to give feedback and, be put on a functional path again. It happened to me, actually. I'll not go into detail, but I was doing one service and it was drying me out. I was really getting dry. And eventually I thought, I have to actually make a change here. Otherwise I'm going to dry up and blow away, So I changed my situation. And guess what? Nobody asked me what I wanted to do. They put me into a situation where I was just ripe for drying up and blowing away again, same service. And I thought, wow, what do I do here? There's authorities. I thought, this is not right. I had enough intelligence. This is not right. I've been around for like 20 years. I should have an idea of what I can do, And so I actually, I dodged and weaved and they kicked me out. And I didn't have anywhere to go. And then somebody took a little bit of, I weren't bothered actually. I thought, at least I can go somewhere else and do what I want to do. But then this other devotee, this other leader, he took a little, and he gave me a service that I could function on. And now a little bit independent. But that's, we shouldn't have to do that, But so it's not, it's a matter of, the spiritual master or the leader knows, but it's actually carefully done, that's all. There's dialogue. And that's what Bhagavad Gita says, isn't it? Tadvidi pranipatena pranipashena sevaya upadekshanti de gyanam gyaninas tatvadarshinha. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. And so it says, Prabhupada says that, in that particular verse, that blind following is condemned. So therefore, we have to be able to, differentiate or discriminate. So what were the points here? So, here it's talking about Brahma Bhuta and Jiva Bhuta. So Brahma Bhuta is a spiritual platform and Jiva Bhuta is a material platform. And here in the purport, it says that, it doesn't say in this purport, but in the Bhagavatam, it says, the only real life is Brahma Bhuta. It says everything else is actually a waste of time. It's not actually life. Real life is Brahma Bhuta. Everything else is actually an illusion. Here today, gone tomorrow. And as we progress, we'll realize that more and more. When I go back home, it's not home anymore. I used to call it home. Condition. I said, when I used to go back home to see my parents and my brother, and spend a day or 2 days with them and then come back. But then, my father left his body 2007. But, my mother was still there and my brother. Then I think it was 2019, my mother left. And then when I went back, there's something missing. And then, my brother, he's like got his own life. And then, at that point, everybody I'd recognized, I used to see odd persons who and there was nobody I recognized on the street or anywhere around. And all of a sudden, I felt really detached. This is not home. So this is a benefit of time. Has two things. It takes away the duration of life and it facilitates activities, but it also makes us detached. And I realized that there's nothing to be attached to anymore. And, a devotee has to, the Haryashvas were detached by hearing from Narada Muni. So that's the purpose of hearing, is to be sufficiently educated to be detached. And then when we're detached, we can actually engage in devotional service properly. Satam prasangam mama viri samvido, jantirit-kana rasayanakta, tadjoshnat apavavargavartmani, shradaratir bhakti anukramishati. So it's saying in the association of devotees, topics about the Supreme Lord are very satisfying and pleasing to the ear and heart. And by cultivating those, discussions, one gradually becomes advanced on the path of devotional service and becomes freed. What does freed mean? Nishta. Become freed from material attachments, or at least the gross ones. So then we can actually focus. Real devotional service begins. So this is raga bhakti, raganuga bhakti. We start to follow with some natural inclination. So then then we're actually not needing, the spiritual master doesn't have to give us so much input. When we're more spontaneous about service, then it flows. and when it comes from the heart, the whole purpose is for devotional service to come from the heart, isn't it? It's not something we do like, And when it's like it comes from the heart, that's actually what Krishna wants. He wants a relationship. And so in devotional service, it's not just a matter of, first of all, there's Vaidhi, there's rules and regulations, but the second half of sadhana bhakti is spontaneity. And that spontaneity is nourished by relationships between devotees. If there's no relationship between devotees, then it's very difficult to maintain, isn't it? There has to be a loving relationship. And so this is that's the difference between material and spiritual. Vaishnava etiquette, it starts with. That's why Vaishnava etiquette's there. By Vaishnava etiquette, then, we act on we follow the right protocol, but then it starts to we start to imbibe it. And, Lord Chaitanya, he was so happy with Sanatana Goswami. Sanatana Goswami was, he developed sores all over his body. And so much so that he didn't want to go past the front gate of the Jagannath temple because he would contaminate the Brahmins who were going in to worship Lord Jagannath. And so he went the long way around. And that meant going on the beach, and midday it was blistering hot. So when he reached Lord Chaitanya looked at his feet and said, "Which way did you come?" And when he told him, he said, "Your feet are all blistered. Why did you come that way?" He said, "Because I didn't want to contaminate the Brahmins who were worshipping Lord Jagannath." And, Lord Chaitanya was in ecstasy. He said, "You are the emblem of Vaishnava etiquette." So unless we actually develop, these qualities, what's the point? The whole point is actually to lose our material conditioning and our material way of associating, and make it so it's a spiritual relationship. And the difference between spiritual and material is that material means, we're doing things ultimately to satisfy our mind and senses. And spiritual activity means ultimately we're doing things to satisfy the Supreme Lord. So, contamination goes in the mind and the senses and the mind and the intelligence. And so this process of hearing Bhagavatam every morning is actually purifying the mind and intelligence. And gradually, Bhagavatam explains how this dissolves the false ego. When something dissolves, it's like effortless, isn't it? It just disappears. There it goes. But we shouldn't put any more fuel on the fire. That's the thing. It'll just gradually dissolve away by this process. So we have to be, very, very patient, very enthusiastic. What's the last one? Patient, enthusiasm, and confidence. So that's where the confidence is coming from. You can't be enthusiastic unless you're confident, can you? What do you think? If you're going on a journey and you don't know the way, will you be confident? No. You want some guidance along the way. So Shastras are like that. And then when we're confident, we can be patient also. So that's raising us from the mode of passion to the mode of goodness, patience. So, Lord Chaitanya has made devotional service accessible to everybody. Vairagya Vidya, Nija Bhakti Yoga, Shikshartham Eka Purushaparana, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Shariradari, Kripambudir Yas Tam Aham Prabhajye. This is a verse by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And he's explaining the reason for Lord Chaitanya's appearance. He's saying that Lord Chaitanya is a most merciful incarnation of the Lord, and he's come into this world to deliver real knowledge, to run renunciation. What's the last one? Devotional service. Knowledge, renunciation, and devotional service. And he's done this because he's an ocean of transcendental mercy. So, and automatically when we follow in Lord Chaitanya's footsteps, then, we develop this renunciation, Mahaprabhura, Bhakta Ganera, Vairagya Padan, Yandeki Pritihana Gora Bhagavan. He says the renunciation is the basic principle which sustains the life of Lord Chaitanya's devotees. He says when Lord Chaitanya sees the renunciation of his devotees, he becomes extremely happy. So this verse is speaking about, the renunciation of the Haryashvas. They're fully convinced they should follow their father. He's their first father. But his second father is Narada Muni. That's in the Bhagavatam. It explains how this is the real father in the first canto. The first father is by seminal discharge. The second father is by transcendental knowledge. And so the Haryashvas, they could understand that, which way to go. Is it true that everybody will follow that path of the Haryashvas? What? Yeah, they immediately renounced. They became brahmacharis or sannyasis. They just renounced everything. So, these different orders of life are so that renunciation can be applied according to the particular nature of the devotee. Brahmacharya, then grihastha, then vanaprastha, and eventually sannyas. So, premature renunciation is not recommended. Premature renunciation means that we'll become disheartened and we won't be able to carry on with the process. Or it'll be difficult anyway. Okay, we can stop there a little early. Has anybody got any comments or questions? Jabat Prabhu.
Thank you very much for the class, Maharaj. As far as I understand, the Haryashvas were performing austerities. But they were performing austerities for a considerably long time with the intention of becoming empowered to produce progeny. That was the desire of Daksha. So because they performed austerities, it would have seemed that they were more capable of accepting Narada's instructions because they'd already been undergoing austerity and they hadn't been on the path of Pravritti Marg for quite some time, at least not actively on it. So I was just thinking of persons who are forced to undergo austerity because of illness or because of poverty or because of some disaster in their life. Are such persons also more qualified or more able to accept spiritual instruction? And should we take the opportunity when we see people in that situation? I don't mean just someone we don't know, but someone perhaps who struggled with spiritual life, but then they're forced to undergo austerity because of illness or because of poverty. So should we see that as an opportunity to give them kind of
Yeah, I mean, when we're in difficulty, it's easier to take up devotional service. When we're, Jesus said that it's easier for an elephant to go through an eye of a needle than to go back to the kingdom of God, because then a person who's, rich, who's wealthy or proud. So, when we have material facility, we think we're self-sufficient. That's the point. And we think it tends to make us a little bit feeling of independence. And so when we're actually have some ailment or some disability or so many things, it actually makes us more introspective and tends to humble us. But it's not necessary that we'll take the devotional service, but it's easier. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but I was also wondering if there's a danger that... is it correct to assume that Narada, because he was such a elevated Paramahansa, he would have been able to understand the hearts of the Haryashvas, that they were able to take up the path of devotional service, whereas I don't feel personally qualified to be able to direct someone in that regard, someone perhaps who's previously been quite materialistic, but due to some sudden financial crisis or some health crisis, then they've gone through a difficult period. So should we feel now's an opportunity to say to them, well, why go back to your materialistic way of life? Because now you've had an experience that you can live without it. But is there not a danger that on a deeper level there's still some very strong material desires there which could come up? So that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, deep, materialistic desires are very deep in the heart. Everybody's got them. They go so deep. But at least you can get started when you're in difficulty in this world. You rethink. At least you can start the devotional service. And then if they, get the right association, they can actually make progress. And then gradually all these things, during the practice, these things will come up. And, we'll be able to recognize them and then, deal with them. So, yeah, it's not that we can actually get rid of material desires quickly. Maybe some can. And as far as, Narada Muni, as far as him preaching to the Haryashvas, he preached to Mugrari, the hunter, who was completely in the mode of ignorance. And so he had that potency. There's actually, devotees have a certain potency. We can't give bhakti if we don't have it. So somebody who's got a lot of bhakti, they can have a big effect on somebody. Yeah. We don't always work like that. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was reflecting on something you were saying, Maharaj, about the the GBC, and they want more spiritual masters. And I was thinking that as devotees, we're not trained to be spiritual masters. We're trained to assist those who are spiritual masters. And perhaps that may be a weakening of our society, that we don't feel personal responsibility to take disciples of ourselves, not necessarily diksha formally, but to take that responsibility to actually, I'm now going to be responsible for these people. We often have the societal structure is someone else's responsibility to do that, and we're just playing our part in that system. So just really reflection, perhaps you can think about that. Are you yourself going to take responsibility to be a spiritual master in light of this dire need for more spiritual masters? Just a second question.
I mean, the training comes through the process. When we start to preach, and we start to become spiritual masters. As soon as we start to preach about Krishna, to some degree, we're actually giving shiksha. So that gradually increases. That maybe on Sangatam, and then the next stage is cultivating devotees, and then mentoring devotees. So I think there is a certain degree of natural training there already. And then, somebody who's particularly qualified, it becomes evident that, this person can, and, people tend to want to take shelter of that person because they've been inspired by that person. So it's a natural organic process. And the training that you spoke about is, they do give you I think it's a 3-day course in Mayapur now. And, but that course weren't necessarily, how to be a spiritual master. You can't tell somebody in 3 days how to deal, with such a elevated post. But they were telling us about, more or less how to function in the movement. You know what I mean? Because we've got parallel lines of authority now. Did you know that? Parallel lines of authority. That's one is the guru, and one is the administrative. It's not necessarily all administrative. Our local, or authoritative in our particular yatra. So one is responsible for this. They're both responsible for the spiritual training, actually. Let's start from. They're both responsible for the spiritual training. That's the main thing. Because when you spiritually train people nicely, they just become enthusiastic to serve, you know. So that's the first thing. And it says that the spiritual master and the head of or the person who's taking particular care of that devotee and engaging him in service, they should be linked. They should be, you know, so that they both treat the disciple in an appropriate way. They're not giving contrary instructions. So, you know, there's two lines. And generally, the spiritual master who's not dealing with the disciple so much, he'll try and help the person who is. He'll defer to try and help that person, you know, guide his disciple. He'll cooperate, in other words. Is that all right? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Gantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Oh, the
Haribo. His Holiness Dayananda Maharaj ki.